Now, as hundreds of people gathered around the world to join in the people's climate change marches, reporter Marienna Pope-Weideman went and had a look at what the London crowd were feeling.
We're here today in Parliament Square, where tens of thousands have joined the People's Climate March. Solidarity and protest activity is being held in over 900 locations worldwide today, as New York City prepares for what is being billed as the largest climate demonstration in history. Today brings together scientists and environmentalists with labour and religious leaders to apply pressure to the world's governments in the run-up to the climate summit due to be held in December.
Well, I think what it is, it's a lot of people, a lot of politicians, they're not in touch with reality. They live in a different world, they live in a little bubble, and they don't seem to understand the huge impact that a 1% or 2% in temperatures will create around the world.
There's something which affects all of us, and we have some people in Birmingham and some in Huddersfield, and we all believe that this is something that more Muslims should be involved in. We as Muslims, our belief and our values, they almost entail that we need to take action on climate change, because Allah has told us in the Quran as Muslims that we are custodians of the earth, right? Now, all human beings, we can, even if we don't agree on beliefs, what we can agree on is climate change affects everyone, and we as Muslims believe that we're going to be accountable.
Now we're noticing it happening, we're seeing it happening around the world. Climate change is really affecting people's lives, and I think we're recognising as a generation that we won't have a future to survive in. So it's about how you create that change, and we need to hit those politicians, because at the moment they're listening to corporations, they're listening to money, they're listening to oil, and they need to start listening to young people.
In London, an estimated 40,000 people took to the streets, many families and first-time protesters coming together with a vast array of research and campaigning organisations.
It was incredibly exciting. I was at the National Climate March 2 years ago, and about 500 people turned up, and I was kind of left it feeling pretty despondent. So seeing thousands of people, I don't actually know what the numbers are yet, but this really, from the moment that I came down, I was just smiling. I think there are so many different issues encapsulated with in the climate movement, and there's so many different demands that need to be met, that just creating a strong narrative that's inclusive, that's not isolating to people. And I think today we've actually seen quite a broad coalition of different groups come together, which is a really positive thing.
What we can do is ask people to blog, ask people to tweet, ask people to make more of an awareness on social media, and also to attend these protests, because this actually has a lot of pressure on the politicians. It's a people power at the end of the day.
Actions have been held in thousands of towns and cities across the world in a globally coordinated day of action that spanned 166 countries. Major demonstrations erupted in Paris, Berlin, Istanbul, Melbourne, Jakarta, Rio de Janeiro and elsewhere. In New York City, an unprecedented 300,000 people protested ahead of Tuesday's global warming summit to be hosted there by the United Nations.
I hope this voice will be truly reflected to the leaders when they meet on September 23rd. Climate change is a defining issue of our time, and there is no time to lose.
Just as important as the anti-war marches back in 2003 and 2002 and 2003 in order to save the world. And not enough people realise how important it is. So the more people who come, the better. Absolutely, we've got to get this movement going and going. I have been interested in these kind of questions since 1966, right? And if we'd done alternative energy and things then, we wouldn't be in the state we are in now and still being reliant on fossil fuels.
We're fed up of hearing things that sound good but never follow through. And I think more on behalf of the countries that have been promised action for so long, the countries that are going to bear the brunt of it, the vulnerable countries that are looking to the West for leadership and haven't got it, I think to them, you owe it to them, and we are watching.
For years now, climate refugees have outnumbered those fleeing conflicts around the world. These actions are meant to raise awareness about the threat posed by global warming and call for an end to mass deforestation and investment in the transition to a renewable energy economy. Given the scale of today's success, The hope now is to build a stronger social movement in the run-up to the UN Climate Change Conference in Paris next year, which many scientists regard as the last real chance to achieve a universal agreement on CO2 emissions before it's too late. Marienna Pope-Weideman reporting for Islam Channel.
Well, joining me to discuss this is Natalie Bennett, leader of the Green Party of England and Wales, Muzammal Hussain is representative of Wisdom in Nature, and on Skype from Florida, Abduraheem Green, founder and chairman of the Islamic Education and Research Academy. Welcome to the programme, everybody. Natalie, very big turnout in Britain, very big turnout globally. What do you hope it'll mean?
Well, I think what we're really seeing is a real rise again in interest and concern about climate change, not before time in terms of the science, but it's very exciting just how global this movement has been and the strength of it in places like New York, which is really important. And I was particularly touched by the fact that apparently there was a protest in Aleppo in Syria, and, you know, in a place with so many enormous problems that some people were brave enough to come out onto the streets to protest about climate change. I think that's really important.
Abduraheem, you were in the States. The New York march, at any rate, looked absolutely massive. Has this come out of nowhere, or were there signs that the march would be this big?
Actually, I was in Toronto. I did see. Right. I was at the Toronto march. I'm not in Florida. I was in Toronto. The turnout in Toronto was pretty good, but nothing like the turnout in New York. It looked absolutely amazing. I mean, I think there were 400,000 people. And, you know, I think it's really great that people, my main thing is to encourage Muslims to take this issue really seriously. And because it's something that, you know, we as Muslims should really care about. We should care about our planet. And I do think we have real solutions for this problem that stretch far beyond the sort of very limited materialistic viewpoints at the moment. And I think that's what's really key. You know, I think the real solution to climate change is actually, it's a spiritual one. It's about changing our life, changing the way we live our lives, really changing, you know, life philosophy. And that's the key, because the rest of it is just putting Band-Aids on the outward symptoms of the inward disease. But, you know, that doesn't mean Muslims, we should get out there, we should get involved, we should do all the reuse, recycle, I forgot the 3 R's now. That's disgraceful. There you go.
And with a surname like Green, you've really got to wonder there.
And my blog is called Islam's Green as well. You know, there's an environmental theme to it. But no, I mean, seriously, it is. You know, the former scientist, the former head of science, leading the government in science from the last government, he was very clear about it. He said this is just way beyond terrorism. This is the biggest threat to humanity in this century, and we are just, you know, we are not taking it seriously. We at the moment, Muslims in the UK are sending lots of money to all over the world to disaster zones, and they just come one after the other. And what is coming up, if we don't do something about it, is going to make everything that's happening now look like a picnic in the park. I mean, the effects, if global warming, if the effects of it really turn out to be anything, even a percentage of what the scientists are saying, it's a catastrophe.
Okay, Muzammal, let me just bring this conversation back to the studio. Muzammal, do you think, one of the people interviewed there in the news report said that, you know, we need a demonstration, we need a movement the size of the demonstrations over the Iraq War in 2003. Now, famously, that was a moment of a very large-scale Muslim engagement with that movement. Do you think that something similar can be built from the Muslim community into the climate change movement?
Well, I would see the climate change movement, and just sort of taking forward what Abduraheem Green was saying about it being a symptom, and that the symptom is that the Earth has a fever. And we can treat the fever with paracetamol. We can look at it from that point of view, that that's what we're treating, or we can get to what's the disease, what's the infection that's there. And I think if it's just about you're only acting on climate change if you're protesting, then I think that's a limited view of what kind of engagement possibilities there are. I think at the heart of this is is the power structures, and that power is concentrated very much on corporations, and the economic system, economic growth is idolized. That's become the center, and that's taking a lot of resources from the planet, and there's a lot of more throughput through the system, releasing pollution, releasing greenhouse gases.
Now, Natalie, there's a lot there that you'd agree with, presumably.
Very much so. I mean, the reduce, reuse, recycle, that's basically addressing individual behaviour. And, it's really great that individuals do whatever they can to make less impact on the planet. And, of course, climate change isn't the only environmental threat we're facing. We're looking at the state of our oceans, the state of our fresh water, the state of our soils. But individual action can only go so far. I'd agree that really we need to change the whole system. And I'd say that you look at the fact we've got an economic crisis, a major global economic crisis, and financial crises keep happening more and more often. We've got the social crisis of inequality, the fact that, for example, here in Britain, last year, we use the resources of 3 planets every year. When we've only got 1 planet, but yet last year 1 million people had to depend on charity, had to depend on food banks to feed themselves, and 20% of workers aren't paid enough money to live on. So we have basically a failed economic system, a failed social system, and we cannot continue treating the world the way it is, either in terms of the economy, the environment, or society.
Just let me ask you about that, because you've both made the point, all 3 of you made the point, that this is a system failure. Do you think that sometimes that's a kind of disincentive to activism? Because people say, well, if we've got to change the whole thing to get any change here, then whoa, that's too big a question. Do you think equally important is the kind of things that you were mentioning there towards the end? If it also feels like it's, okay, there's a system question, but there's also a right here and now question. Do you think that intensifies the activism?
I think the system problem we can break down into lots of things that lots of people should, want to campaign on. We need a different kind of economic system. So we need rich individuals and multinational companies to pay their taxes, so we can do things like invest in insulation programs so that everyone in Britain has a warm, affordable to heat home. We can say that workers should be paid enough to live on and not have to work 2 and 3 jobs, so then they've got the time and energy to think about how they're living their life. We can say that we can improve public transport, make it affordable, convenient and reliable, and then people don't have to drive their cars to work. So all of those things, there's millions of things that you can campaign on, all of which in small and big ways start to change the system.
Okay. Abduraheem, I mean, you've made the case, others have made the case that, there's a kind of Islamic compulsion towards the idea of saving the planet and of acting on climate change. But as on the Iraq war, there will be some within the Muslim community who disagree, and there will be some who perhaps, not so many in this country perhaps, but in other countries, who are owning factories that are polluting. Well, what have you got to say to them?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good point. I highlighted this in an article I recently wrote, which was on 5 pillars and Islam 21st century, that actually, of course, we can talk about Islam being the solution. And I do believe it is the solution. I do believe the solution is a spiritual one. It's about life philosophy. It's about what is important to us as human beings. But it's a fact that actually some of the biggest polluters, and of course many of the major oil producers, are indeed Muslim countries. But and so that there's going to be a resistance from that angle. But I think that's not the way we should judge Islam. I mean, I think this is a refrain that we are constantly repeating, that don't judge Islam by Muslims. We need to judge the religion on its own merits, and what does the religion offer as a solution on its merits, and that's distinct from the action of Muslims. Unfortunately, Islam is very interestingly, I was just tuning into the streaming of Islam channel, and Sheikh Abduraheem Quick was mentioning about how we've externalized the religion. It's a lot about rituals. It's a lot about, what we wear. We make the movements of prayer. We make the outer movements, but unfortunately, we don't have the soul, the Islamic soul. We don't have that internal dimension, which is so important. And I think that's, in a sense, what is lacking, because if we had that inner dimension, we would profoundly care about our environment, and we would profoundly care about what everything is going on around us.
We'll just bring you back to this issue just a minute. Muzammal, is there going to be a kind of, again, to talk about the parallel with 2003 and the anti-Iraq war, there was a lot of work that went in the mosques locally, talking to people, precisely because everybody knew that, just to say this community isn't to say there's political agreement on issues like this. But there was a lot of educational work and argument that went on there to mobilise people. Do you think there's going to be a similar process now?
I can see that there is a gradual increase in the number of Muslims that may not be directly working on climate change. But one of the things I'm involved with myself is permaculture, which is about using the principles and patterns in nature, which Islam and other faiths also give a lot of value to. Nature is actually regarded as signs, iERA, signs that point to the Creator. And it's basically the Creator speaking through nature. That's what's really going on. And we can learn a lot from those principles, and with things like permaculture, which I believe allow for the practice of the principles of Islam in a practical way that cross the boundaries of faith, so we can work with other people. I see more Muslims actually engaging and finding connections between, say, Islam and permaculture and these approaches, and are getting into food growing, getting into, hopefully getting into things like transition initiatives. I think that sort of thing will gradually happen again, which is a response to peak oil and climate change. At the heart of this problem is a disconnect between us and nature, between the economy and nature. And from a religious perspective, you could say it's a disconnect from people, a person to unity or to the divine, whatever you want to call it, but a sense of oneness that's there, that everything works in harmony. So I think what we need to do is begin to connect more, connect with the earth and build relationships with each other, which I think we're relating too much and too dependent on corporations. And it's very sticky, this. So I think there's a lot of responsibility.
It's an interesting point, because these are points that many environmentalists, very similar language to many environmentalists who don't have a religious dimension to that thought, who are active in the movement. If it's beginning to develop sort of, very different constituencies all coming together in the movement like this, what are the next steps for it? I mean, we mentioned in the report there's the Paris conference coming up. Where are we going with this?
Well, I think looking at the broader point about the opportunities, different ideas coming up, the fact is what we really have is, for the past 35, 40 years, the ideas of Margaret Thatcher and Reagan, Ronald Reagan, the whole neoliberal idea that we're just chasing after profits, it doesn't matter if the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, and we're certainly not thinking about the environment. That's been the dominant landscape of most political debate, most social debate. And those ideas are just very clearly bankrupt now. They've failed even in their own terms. So we're really at the point where people are just looking around and saying we need a whole different way, foundational different way of thinking about things. And that's a real opportunity. And what I would say is, and I think people from many different perspectives would agree with this, let's start with the principle that everyone should have access to the resources, to the decent quality of life, food, shelter, clothing and all the rest. And we have to do that within the limits of the one planet. So those are the kind of guiding rules. And if we can all agree that, then we can start to really debate, how we do it. And I think that's just a principle that many, many people can agree on.
Abduraheem, I mean, that's something that you must have sympathy with, because it speaks to the basic principles of social justice, quite aside from the climate change dimension of it.
Absolutely. I think those are very noble principles. We can all agree with them. And I think that this issue of climate change and global warming has the potential to bring a lot of different traditions together. I think all spiritual traditions in this particular dimension, in this whole discussion, they all have something very, very valuable to contribute. I know I keep saying the same thing, but I do really believe that the solution is one which is about how we view our responsibility. If we just keep on believing that life is about consuming, life is about buying this, buying that, and that's all we're exposed to. Most of us are exposed to this 24 hours. Most people who know me know that from my sex, drugs, rock and roll, Coca-Cola, Muslim talks, right? It's all about consumerism, and we just can't. It's just not the way.
Afraid we're going to have to move on. I'm going to have to stop you there, fascinating as that last moment was. Unfortunately, that's all the time we've got for in this episode of The Report. I want to thank all my guests and, of course, you for watching. Do remember that you can tweet us your thoughts using the hashtag The Report, or email us at thereport@islamchannel.net.tv. We're back tomorrow evening at the same time, but for now we'll leave you with some scenes from Moscow, where the best readers of the Quran from all over the world are gathered to showcase their skills in the 15th International Competition of Quran Reading. See you tomorrow night.